It's July 4th for our American friends, and I thought, why not play 1775 Rebellion against a hard AI here today on Legendary Tactics. Now, I haven't played this game for the channel, at least, in quite a while. Actually, I couldn't believe how long it's been. But I thought I would take the British side this time and play again against a hard AI and see how much of a challenge it gives me. So the interesting thing about this game is that you have to control the states in order to score the points. You can see now some states are going to be easier to control than others. For example, Rhode Island, Delaware, those are pretty easy to control. New York State, a little bit harder than that. But I think the idea is that it's also more sparsely populated, so it's a little less of an issue for even some states. I think Virginia would be pretty tough to control, but there's some that are there that like Massachusetts, New Hampshire, not too bad. So initially I'm just figuring out where to put my my units, and I'm watching the AI as well. And the AI is definitely concentrating forces in Connecticut. I think that's also partly because that's the one of the two states that they control, and so they kind of have to focus their forces that way. But it's probably a good overall strategy anyway. The other thing that's interesting that the hard AI does is moves into the native territory to kind of bring them into the fold, which I thought was kind of it's an interesting move. This game has kind of sometimes less time than you think it will, so perhaps maybe as a defensive move it's not too bad, but to actually bring those native warriors into battle, it's not the easiest from the far end of Virginia or Pennsylvania. It takes up a valuable move that might be better used elsewhere. So anyway, we're going to head into our first battle, and the Siege of Princetown. And this is, I rolled 3 blank dice, so that gives me a command decision, basically. So I just retreated out of there. There's no point. I'm up against 6 regulars and 5 militia, so no point in seeing where that one's going to go. I may as well just concentrate my forces. My general approach in this game is I want to try and hit any vulnerable regulars. Regulars are harder to replace and they're more effective in the field, obviously, so we want to make sure that we take those out as best as possible. And now the AI makes a move on Maine, which is interesting because it threatens both Nova Scotia and Quebec as well. So probably a smart move on their part. I don't have a lot of pieces there. Now I rolled 3 blanks again, so that gives me a command decision as to what might make the most sense to do. And I'm kind of scanning around now for potential areas to retreat to. And you can split things up. You don't have to go to one space. You can move to any neighboring space that is neutral or under your control. So I just retreated those guys out there. Just conservation of forces. This guy flees. My militia flees, which is an acceptable result, really, because they weren't going to win the battle, and I may as well get them back later. So now the British regulars, I can replace 1 Continental army with 1 British regulars in any one area, and that one could be interesting to play, especially since you can literally replace an American regular in a space where there's already the American units, and you can replace them and then start a battle right away. So it's kind of interesting that way, but also from a territory control perspective, it does open up some options. So just trying to take a look at the big picture here and where I might want to where I might want to go. This game is generally very focused around New England. The scene that we're looking at right now, Connecticut, Massachusetts, Maine, New York, Pennsylvania. As you go further south, there's less and less that can be done. It's not that it's not valuable, and there may be a viable strategy for down there, but I just find there's too much to contend with in the north, that it's really just a matter of a limited number of moves there. So I'm looking at the various options here, and there really isn't that many places to reinforce. There's just Delaware at the moment, Nova Scotia. If should I choose to, it's a little bit far away. As far as that goes, and Quebec is some distance, but not too far from Maine. So there's some opportunity there. But really, Delaware is probably the best spot overall because it's right in the action, and my goal is to take out the larger groups, especially of the U.S. regulars. The militia I'm not so afraid of, but there's some monster stacks that the Americans can build up of regulars, and those are the ones I have to be careful of. So I'm just debating between moving 2 units 2 or 3 units 1, and I'm gonna create an army here, leaving behind a militia, and again, just to deal with the threat to Nova Scotia. And I'm also eyeing that group of natives just to the north in New York there. I want to make sure that I get some reinforcements there. That could be useful. Get them on our side. And then the question is, how much should I go on the offensive at this stage? So I'm going to move everything into battle here. So other than that, there's no battle cards or anything to worry about. Although I am going to use this one, and I'm going to flip one of the American regulars to my side. And again, at this point, I'm just worried about the stacks, the killer stacks of American regulars. So I'm actually going to just go in there and take this over. I'm right beside that 7 and 5 stack, as you can see. So that's why I flipped a regular from that side, so that I would have a bit more of a stack to contend with. And we managed to take control there without too much fuss. And the one thing actually, as I played this game, that was a bit surprising is, and it may be either just a weakness in the AI or maybe actually a conscious choice, is how few of the command orders were taken. Given the option to retreat, the AI usually chooses to fight it out. Now the Queen's Rangers adds +2 movement to all armies move this turn, but not for boat movement, which makes sense. And that's perfect because I happen to have a move 3 armies 1 card in hand. So that's going to be a really great combo to have. To move 3 armies 3 is pretty flexible. So I'm just going to have to, I think, hang on to that. And that's there's another 3 moves 3. So there's lots of flexibility with the militia here. And I have 5 units available. The only problem is they're just too far away. I've kind of written off Halifax at the moment as a viable reinforcement spot, unless I'm really stuck. But Quebec seems okay, and especially with 3 movement, and of course Delaware is totally fine. So I'm going to reinforce a fair bit there, and then move 3 units 3. And I've got a reasonably sized army up in Quebec. I've also got some options in the south as well, and there's some states like Georgia, which could be easy pickings. I guess I could move 3 armies 5 if I wanted to, but it seems like overkill to me. So, but I'm happy to move in. I really want to make sure that I recapture Maine at this point. I think as a strategy, it's a viable one to kind of create almost like a line. So just as you would in a lot of war games like this, you want to create a battle line, something where you've got your troops. Yeah, here I was looking at that. No, not necessary. But having a battle line where you can defend a line and not let the enemy through. I think in this case you can put a lot of pressure on that way, because as long as your line is reasonably strong, you're going to force the opponent to attack you to get anywhere, and that, I think, is a good kind of pressure to put on them, because the idea is that it limits options in a game like this where you don't have a lot of movement over the course of the game. Limiting options, I think, is a good idea, and you can even do kind of that gamey strategy that Axis and Allies became famous for, where you just leave one militia behind in a hex, and it stops an entire army from advancing just because they don't have, just because they have to stop to do battle. Yeah, I lost a militia here to cowardice, but won the day at any rate, and so that gives me a bit of a line here. So you can see I'm kind of building up a battle line here that I'm hoping to reinforce, and I think that as long as we can recapture Maine and New Hampshire there, then that will be a nice tidy line to defend. Now the US player gets one of those dice that's on its side. It counts as a hit, unfortunately. So anyway, I'll lose a couple militia there, and we'll go all in on the regulars and just hope for the best. Hopefully I can get some hits here, and of course they completely miss. So now I'm at a stage where what should I do? And I just said, well, let's give it another go, and I suffered 2 hits by the U.S. force. I mean, I couldn't believe it when I saw that die roll. Oh my gosh! And I roll a command action, so I'm going to be retreating here and getting out. Now the problem is, now it leaves Nova Scotia a bit open. I've only got a couple militia there to really defend Nova Scotia, so that was not a desired result at all. But we're going to be able to take this other part of Maine and at least cut off. It's not a massive U.S. force in my back 40 there, but it should be reasonably dealt with, hopefully. Now, of course, I had a couple more militia flee, but I did prevail in the battle. So a little bit weakened, definitely not the combat results I was hoping for, but we're beginning to kind of slowly work towards my goal, which is to lock down Maine and eventually New Hampshire as well, and just draw a line across New York State that is going to be tough to break. And so I'm fortunate to get my militia up, and I have 7 units available. Again, they're a little bit out of position, perhaps, especially when it comes to defending Nova Scotia. Anything can happen in a battle with 1 regular and 1 militia against a couple of 2-3 militia. There's no guarantees in this game, which is one of the reasons why I like it. I think that the battles are handled quite well, and there's really no, you really can't predict the outcome of a battle. You can, usually set everything up in a good way, but at the end of the day is going to be the vagaries of the dice. So I think now is the time to use this to move 3 units, and actually, as it turns out, I'm going to have to use a unit to try and get use that army to crush that army in Maine before it gets there, before it moves into Nova Scotia. And I've still got that massive enemy stack in Pennsylvania there, threatening Delaware and New York as well. So it's it's not an easy thing. I'm gonna try and also see if I can snag an easy spot in Georgia. It's a 2-on-1 there, and I'm just kind of scanning for options here, and to make sure that I'm not missing anything. But those I like this game. I like how it's balanced. I like how the battles go. It's a really fun game. There's really it's got a lot going for it. And here I'm going to try and again extend my line a bit in New York, and so we got 3 battles to get through. This one should be straightforward. We get the militia fleeing. I don't blame them, and for some reason the the regular sticks around, and thankfully my militia were better shots than my regulars and managed to take them down. As a move, I would probably think a retreat here would have been a much better move on the part of the AI, because it just creates that, it prolongs that the inevitable, but it means I have to spend another move to run that unit down to claim Maine. So and you can see here I'm actually reinforcing Maine using the command order there to retreat to a spot in Maine, just to lock that, just to put a little barrier up. And so we're going to do some battles here. Unfortunately, I get a couple of hits, and sadly the native forces are the ones that are going to absorb that damage. And so we're going to keep on rolling here, and not sure which face that was going to land on, but it ended up landing there. And again, that's when we're retreating those units out of there. Just again, and it prolongs the inevitable, but you can potentially use it to reinforce neighbors, or just put up a roadblock to make sure that the enemy can't advance through a hole in your lines, that kind of thing. So anyway, I was down to kind of brass tacks here in terms of this. Now, I was just trying to figure out whether I should reinforce anything. I decided not to. And again, this is where the militia should have retreated, but did not. So I'm going to take advantage of the AI's ignorance. I don't know, overlooking a move there, and I'm going to lock down that part of New York there. So so that means that we're in reasonably good shape. We're getting our line built. Now I make my play for Georgia here, and now that's the interesting thing, is that the AI decided to run and retreat, and essentially we swapped spaces in Georgia for that. So not the it was actually a perfect move from the part of the AI. I basically wasted a move swapping territory in Georgia, but the only other option was to do a 1-on-1 there, and just wasn't going to happen. I think if you get a southern state, it becomes a reinforcement point, a spawn point, if you will, and that could be useful. I haven't played enough of this game to find out if that's actually a viable strategy. As I said, I find that typically this game has enough going on in it that it is there's enough going on in the north to worry about, let alone to spend a ton of time in the south. But I might be overlooking something. It is weakly defended, and I think there may be an option, especially in the further south you go. It's harder and harder for reinforcements to get there from the typical spawn points of your opponents. So I think it's worth considering. Now, Maine becomes a reinforcement point, which is great. So I was able to put a couple regulars in there. Again, that 4-2 army in New Hampshire is making me a little bit nervous. other than that, I'm not under too much pressure here. I think if I can get rid of that 4-2 stack, because I don't have a lot of forces in the neighborhood, I think that would be a good thing. Now I'm looking at, I've got move 2 units 3, move 2 units 2, or I have a C movement card. And now Rhode Island is a little bit vulnerable, and again, I just saw the opportunity to pick off a couple of regulars. As I said earlier, I just find it's such a great, I think it's such a great idea to take out as many of the regulars as you can. They don't replace as quickly, and they are much more deadly, obviously. So, but I'm going to move in, and I'm just going to keep advancing as I have, and look at different options. I do have the native reinforcements with that army group, so I'm going to see what I can do to whittle down the that 4-2, and especially with some reinforcements from Maine. And we'll see what happens here. So we've got a decent force we went all in on that part of New Hampshire, but we've got a decent and very balanced force as well. Now, of course, the Americans get 3 hits, which is fairly substantial. That's a pretty good roll. But that was exactly why I wanted to get rid of this army group. Now he retreats one of the militia, and hopefully I can get some decent things here. And unfortunately, all 3 militia flee, which was, again, not ideal. I did get a couple hits, so I'm, again, just whittling down. Now, again, the interesting thing that I found was that the AI actually will remove regulars in the name of getting a more balanced roll. So it's something where they will sacrifice a regular if it means they can still get a roll for the militia, which seems to me to be, I mean, it's, I guess, one strategy, but to me it doesn't seem like a great approach. I mean, I guard my regulars, I treat them like they're literal gold, because I really don't want to lose. I even get nervous when there's regulars hanging out in a space all on their own without some militia to absorb hits, but that's just me, maybe. So we managed to kind of take out that group. 2 units escaped, but definitely by taking away the reinforcement aspect, by removing New Hampshire as a threat for reinforcement, I think that was very key. Because now any reinforcements have to arrive via Connecticut or Rhode Island and march to New Hampshire to get anywhere. So, looks like the AI is going all in on Massachusetts, and this is going to be a heck of a battle. I've got a decent force if I can roll well, and I managed to roll pretty well. I've got nowhere to retreat to, unfortunately, but this is truly a siege of Boston. But I did manage to get a few hits. Now, obviously, the militia are going to be the ones that take the brunt of that, but I mean, hits are hits, and you just got to hope that the militia flees. And interestingly, one of the regulars flees, which is interesting. You don't see that tremendously often, so I lose a militia, which is very, very sad, but that's the way it is. And now suddenly we're in a more balanced battle here. And again, if I can just roll reasonably well, and I don't especially do that, but it definitely is. If there's a flea or 2 here or something like that, and there is one, then we're in reasonable shape. We still take a hit, but now I've got 3 regulars against 1 enemy regular now. So we're gonna go all in, and we managed to hold our own there, which is pretty sweet. We managed to retain Boston against a pretty decently large force. There was a lot of militia in that force. Now, of course, the last play of the round goes to the U.S. regulars, and of course, with some reinforcements, they are going to storm Boston yet again. They're not going to let that result stand if they can possibly help it. We also get a little bit of action going on again, and this is, as I said, the one thing is, yeah, it's great to have the native tribes on your side, but to me, it takes a lot of troops out of position, and you got to move them back, and it takes time and energy. And anyway, my siege of Boston resumes with fresh reinforcements on the American side, and I managed to get a couple of units. Now, again, in the name of a balanced role, the American removed a couple of regulars. One fled, as well as a militia, but a couple hits, that's going to really hamper my my style here for the remaining bit of Boston, remaining forces there. I managed to get one hit, and again, interestingly, takes out a regular because didn't want to ruin the dice roll and have a regular sitting on the sidelines. So in the end, it was a bit of a kind of a Pyrrhic victory because I did lose Boston. However, I did take out a fair number of regulars, and now my opponent gets their militia card right out of the gate and reinforces like crazy in Boston and Connecticut, and begins a march to get to Delaware, and again also marches to Maine. And this is where, again, I don't like having regulars on their own, so all Loyalists that flee this turn are replaced with Patriots. So that's kind of an interesting opportunity there. Now, my opponent actually struck at the other part of Maryland as opposed to Delaware. I'm not sure exactly why, but maybe to create a siege situation, possibly. And absolutely crushes my force. However, loses a couple militia to cowardice. So it leaves a very regular heavy army group there, which might be vulnerable. So this is get one hit. This is going to be again a big battle. And I do actually retreat one unit away to the other part of Maine. Discretion being the better part of valor. Would have been wiped out otherwise. So that ended up being a good move. One of the militia fled, and so now I get my move finally. I think my opponent's has had 3 moves in a row as it happened here. So now I've got Delaware under threat. I've also got Maine under threat. It would have been really nice to reinforce Maine with these militia units, but I'm not able to do so, and Maine still hangs in the balance. And I've got it's a pretty reasonably strong force that is there. 2 regulars, 3 militia. I don't have a lot of comparable armies there, unfortunately, so I've got to figure out what I can actually do here. There's nowhere else I can reinforce other than Delaware and Quebec, and and Nova Scotia. But as I said, I've kind of taken Nova Scotia out of the equation, unless I happen to have a sea movement, maybe. But even then, I mean, it just seems like it's just so far away. So looking at my cards, I can move 2 units 2 and 2 units 1. So I'm ended up reinforcing in Quebec, and just doing. I'm going to use my Queen's Rangers here to really get things moving, and I'm going to go all in pretty much on attacking that force in Maine, and hopefully restoring my line and restoring my access to Maine. Here, I'm going to do a strike, a preemptive strike here, while the regulars are there, and it's very vulnerable before that can be reinforced. Now, the Americans get one heck of a roll here. Yes, they lost a regular to cowardice, but man, 4 hits out of 5, and that's with 3 militia rolling. So that was not good. That was a really that really set me back a lot. So now the question remains: what do I do now? 2 militia flee. That entire force evaporated. I just could not believe it. So I'm definitely going to retreat and try and keep some strength in Maine there, and just retreat to rebuild the army. Hopefully this other battle goes better, because that was not supposed to happen. That was a lot of militia. Now, the Americans interestingly flee a lot, and they do get 1 hit, but I've got plenty of militia to absorb them. So this Battle of Maryland is definitely going to be potentially a good thing for me. Now, managed to get a couple hits, and again, with only regulars left, there's not a lot of choice for my opponent. If I can take out that giant force, that will leave things very open, very vulnerable throughout the rest of... Really, this was the killer stack in all of New England here. So I'm going to move a militia there. I feel fairly confident in using my command order to march into Pennsylvania and disrupt that, build up a little barrier there to protect myself. Now, I do suffer some losses due to fleeing here, so my force is reduced. These are why militia are great, but not always reliable. However, I managed to take out that killer stack, so to speak. So with the command block, I'm going to reinforce that spot, and now we've got a pretty good stranglehold on on Delaware. I don't really have to worry about Delaware per se. And fortunately, my regulars are up next, so this is a great opportunity. Now I can add 2 Native Americans plus all fled Native Americans to my reinforcements, which is neat. There's no fled Native Americans at the moment, so I'd like to hang on to that so it could be a little bit more effective. But it is a good card to have in hand, and again, I'm looking at the board and seeing that Rhode Island is a little bit exposed. I know I'd mused about that earlier, about doing a sea battle, and there is a couple of somewhat worrying stacks in Connecticut, Massachusetts, Rhode Island. There's one with 4 regulars, which could be easily reinforced by some militia to become a pretty deadly army, and there's the other one, the 1-4 in Connecticut, that could be reinforced by regulars to make a pretty deadly army. So I'm just kind of tossing around. I've got a few regulars available here, and I still have to take out that force in Maine, though. That's really a big concern, is that force in Maine. I do not want that to get too far. We're locked in a 3-3 tie here, and I do have the sea movement card. But I also was kind of, again, looking at Rhode Island and thinking, or even Boston, and like, hey, that's pretty lightly held. That might be something to look at, and at least cause some sort of distraction. Because, hey, my forces in Boston fought pretty darn well up to that point. So that might be one to retake by sea and see if I could hang on and maybe even hold out in a siege. My forces in New Hampshire are not that far away. Again, provided I can retake Maine, I'll have a reinforcement point, a spawn point quite close to Boston. So this was a kind of a big decision, and in the end, I don't know if I made the best one, but I really probably should have just focused on Maine There's also areas in the south which might be worth looking at, in back in Georgia again, or North Carolina, something like that, South Carolina. But again, with all the big stacks of the big armies up north, I didn't feel like I had the leisure time to really worry about that. There's also the off chance of taking all of New York and taking all of Pennsylvania. That are still a possibility. And again, they're all distractions too. There's any move that I do is going to likely prompt a response. So yeah, this was a big decision point here. It's probably the longest single turn that I contemplated in the entire game. So many options, and I've got a reasonable force in Maryland as well, that can move by sea. So I thought, okay, this is where we're going to move that force, or at least some of that force, from that spot in Maryland, and we're going to go after Rhode Island. And in retrospect, this is probably a bad move in many ways. Again, reinforcing Maine would probably have been the best overall move, but I thought I had to give it a try. So we line up. And actually, the American rule does not go that well. The regular flees, the militia sticks around, and now I did get a couple hits. I did finish off the army, but I lost 2 of my militia in that due to them panicking and fleeing, and that there is why the AI might be wise in when they decide to stay and fight, because you never know, especially when you're up against militia, how many of those you're going to roll. Your opponent's going to roll, and they're going to lose strength. Even just fighting a single militia, they can lose a lot of strength because of the fact that they might flee. British regulars never flee, but the militia definitely can. So in this case, my opponent kind of surprised me a little bit and moved in to take Manhattan, so to speak, and also to crush me in Rhode Island. And this is where I realized, oh boy, I may have made a mistake here. I should have maybe reinforced Manhattan, New York. And so anyway, the siege of Newport begins. I don't roll too badly, but I'm up against a pretty major force. Again, fortunately, the AI loses regulars in their attempt to balance the dice, and they suffer some losses fleeing, but they do enough damage, a couple hits, to really weaken my force. I'm down to 1 regular against 4 regulars and 1 native unit, and I roll a blank, and I've got nowhere to retreat to. And again, this is where maybe attacking Maine would have been a better choice. And anyway, I'm eliminated. So Rhode Island is retaken. And at this point, I thought, oh boy, this could be bad. I'm making a bad mistake here. So we have to defend ourselves here. I managed to get a hit, and 1 militia flees. And I'm up against a pretty decent roll here. And again, it's a siege. I've got nowhere to run to. So anyway, two hits suffered. So there goes the last of my militia, and a regular is also eliminated. So I'm down to just a couple of dice here. No room for error. I do get 1 hit, which is fine because I know the AI is going to lose a regular for that. And they roll, and a militia flees, and no hits. That was a bit of a reprieve. That was actually a really good thing for me. So hopefully I can pick up a couple more hits, and I do. Gotta love those regulars. When they're on, they're on. And so that takes out another couple of Patriots on the part of the Americans there, but then their role is true, and they wipe out my regulars at the cost of one militia fleeing. Now, the only good news is that it is a much depleted force now, holding New York, so holding Manhattan there. So now, then they play a battle card to add 6 French into the mix, and I thought, oh boy, that is not good. That definitely changes the balance there. So that was not a good thing. And so with the regulars, they move into Nova Scotia. The only advantage there being that they divided their forces. They move a bunch of regulars in to retake New Hampshire. And again, I really think I should have reinforced Maine, or should have attacked that American army in Maine. That would have been a much, much wiser move. So now my regulars do get a couple hits, which, when again, the AI will take from their Patriot stack there. If I can avoid damage here, no, not a chance. I lose my regulars, and New Hampshire is again lost. And this was actually the point in the game, knowing that the game has not a lot of moves left. Sorry, I forgot to point out that the Americans did play one of the treaty cards. So this is their end game play. Now, I did add the Hessians into, and then also the natives. I kind of went all in on this because I did not want another treaty card to hit when I was vulnerable. So I had land movement 3 for 2 units, and with the Hessians in Nova Scotia and the 3 native reinforcements here, I thought, well, maybe I can retake Maine, perhaps get into, I'm gonna have to retake Nova Scotia and Maine basically as my restore my lines, and if I have time, go for New Hampshire, but yeah, it's just not looking too good at the moment. So I did get an extra native unit because one of them had fled in a previous battle. So but yeah, it would be great to have a movement of 3, just so I could potentially move into New Hampshire. But again, it's a pretty strong little group there, and really I don't have any really strong forces. Luckily, I've got some movement, and I can potentially get some reasonably strong force down from Quebec here. And so because this was the extent of their movement, I really thought, well, okay, let's lock down Nova Scotia, retake Maine. Still very vulnerable, not at all secure here, but we'll see what we can do. The Americans fortunately don't have a lot of impact with their role. And I think if that gauge is right, it shows 9 militia have fled for the U.S. That's a lot. I mean, I've lost 8 myself, but geez, that's a lot of units that ran away. So anyway, we managed to reclaim Nova Scotia, and arguably it may have been a good idea to move the force from Halifax, maybe, but at this stage I'm just trying to scramble and reclaim my line here. I get a pretty good roll there, though. I managed to remove to regain control of Maine. Now the only trick is, can I hold that long enough for Maine to be a reinforcement point for me? If that's the case, then I'm in good shape. And fortunately, I get the militia, and I get 2 Hessians plus all fled Hessians to reinforcements. So I've got a lock on Halifax, that's for sure, but adding more Hessians would be good. Not sure if that's pronounced Hessians or Hessians. That's how I've always thought of it, pronounced as Hessians. So I've got a reasonably good force. I got 12 units available, not only the 4 reinforcements, but the 8 that had fled. So there's some really good options here in the area of New Hampshire is where I'm looking at. There is a killer stack in Rhode Island there with the French. So I do reinforce Delaware a little bit, but basically I'm going to go all in on reinforcing Maine and charging into New Hampshire, and actually doing it in a way where, you know, we can actually split our forces up a little bit and see, because we got 10 militia there, so we can definitely make sure that we get enough of a force together that we can take down the forces in there's only that one militia force there, but my main goal is to attack that stack of regulars and to make sure that it will be wiped out. And so I thought, well, I'll split the Hessians up. I'm gonna go in with a bunch of militia, and I'm probably overkill, but there may be a counterattack coming. I have the Americans have their militia up next, so they managed to get a hit. That's okay. Got some militia for that, and now I'm gonna roll. This is the big battle. This is the one to really I really need this one to come through. 3 hits will do it. That should be it. I'm not going to use any of my command moves here. I feel I've got enough of a force together to to make sure of it. I do take a quick look around, but my force isn't super powerful. Actually, I was thinking, and I realized I could do a reinforcement into the other battle of in New Hampshire. So that I did actually decide to do that, because I figured we were pretty good with just one enemy unit left there, where I could probably take care of them with the force that I had remaining. Now there was a hit, 1 damage dealt, so we'll lose a militia, and then we will roll and hopefully finish off this group. And I couldn't actually see the die there to see whether I'd gotten it or not, and one of my militia came through, and we removed that force. So aside from that giant force in Rhode Island now, there really is not a lot of strength for the Americans right now. I could foresee rolling in through Massachusetts and causing some havoc. Although, again, there's 9 militia plus the reinforcements, so probably 13 militia to place. So that could tip the scales. But, I mean, militia are still vulnerable to fleeing, and they're not necessarily the most powerful of units. So there's not a lot of American regulars outside of Rhode Island, and I guess you've got that small force in New York. But that is, with no militia there to reinforce, it's a bit vulnerable. So the Paul Revere turns up to add some more reinforcements. And so fortunately I am up 3 to 5, or I'm up 5 to 3 at the moment, with reasonable defenses. Obviously they will be much stronger next turn. all the militia go into Boston, and the American player plays the truce card, and this is really the power play, because if the Americans can tip the scales with their moves, then it could be a problem. Now, fortunately, I roll really well. I do lose militia, but I do get 4 hits. So that does cause a bit of damage to the Americans here. And let's see how they roll. Suddenly that force doesn't look as intimidating. They lose a militia fleeing, and I take a couple of damage. Now I'm down to my really good troops, so I'm going to unfortunately lose a couple of the militia. And the Hessians come through, and the regulars come through. I've got a couple more hits, so I could actually hang on to New Hampshire here if I get lucky. It's gonna still take a bit of luck on my part, but because I don't have a lot of forces, but with one of the American militia fleeing, that definitely helps. And that's why I say militia are kind of an interesting, they're very intimidating, but they may not actually be, they're more of an influence than an actual direct force. So anyway, I managed to hang on to New Hampshire and claim victory. Now, in retrospect, I think the better play would have been, well, obviously the attack in New Hampshire, but I don't think actually the American could have reached the even a tie, because taking down New Hampshire would have still resulted in 3-4. But maybe it was either the card had to be played, or I'm not sure. But at any rate, very good game though. I'm sorry that the British won in this case, to my American friends. And for those of you who watched, thank you so much, and I hope you enjoyed. Take care, and we'll see you next time on Legendary Tactics.